my dad sat me down and said, look, do you want to have a life, childhood, and like grow up with your friends and kind of have a bit more in your life, or do you just want to do gymnastics? And if you just want to do gymnastics, that's fine, but that's all it's going to be. We're going to have to take you out of school and you'll do homeschooling and it'll just be full time. And I chose life. Hello, I'm Shona. I am the creator of the Virtue Method.
Shona, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Shona, let's take our listeners back to your childhood. I want to sort of hear the framing of how career possibilities were shaped for you. Maybe a little bit about like what you wanted to become when you grew up.
It's funny because there was a lot going on, without oversharing on this podcast, there was a lot going on. My parents were not in a good place in terms of their relationship. And so I was very much in the middle of dealing with a very tumultuous situation. A lot of the time as well, things that can happen off the back of childhood trauma is that you develop a very rich imagination. And so I did find myself in daydreams a lot of the time, and I was an only child as well. So I found myself constantly daydreaming, but not really about career. My parents enrolled me into a gymnastics program when I was like 3 years old. It was called Jumping Jelly Babies. But I never thought like, oh, I definitely want to do the Olympics, or I definitely want to get into fitness or any of that sort of stuff. It was just like, I love gymnastics. And they pulled me from that program and put me into the elite program. And so then it was hardcore, 20 hours a week, really intense. But again, I didn't have that feeling. I was just kind of like, I love this. I'm good at it. I'm winning medals. I'm, doing really well. I'm in the top 3 within the group. And so I don't know, it just was, it's really interesting in terms of childhood stuff.
Can you tell me a little bit more about, where gymnastics took you and how long did you continue for on kind of a professional level before things started to change direction career-wise?
Yeah. So probably about 8-9 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, it was getting to the point where I wouldn't be able to do school. I was too young for the Sydney 2000 Olympics. And I was training back and forth at the Australian Institute of Sport. And it was just, we were in discussions about whether, the family's going to relocate to Canberra, which is where it is. But that didn't even cross my mind, to be honest. I was doing so much gymnastics. There wasn't a lot of time for beach anyway. But my dad sat me down and said, look, do you want to have a life, childhood, and like grow up with your friends and kind of have a bit more in your life, or do you just want to do gymnastics? And if you just want to do gymnastics, that's fine, but that's all it's going to be. We're going to have to take you out of school and you'll do homeschooling and it'll just be full time. And I chose life. And I felt like I didn't have this passionate calling. I found it really stressful, especially because, my parents were waking up at 4 a.m. to get me prepared so that we could be at Bunurong Gymnastics for 5:30 a.m. So, I saw what it was doing to them and impacted my motivation because I felt like I was living for them because I saw how much work they had to do. So they were up at, crazy hours. And then after school, I would then go to gymnastics again and be there until 9 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And
so consuming.
Yeah, exactly. And so I saw that and felt like, oh, if I don't win gold, if I don't push myself, then I'm letting them down. And that for anyone that has ever struggled with motivation, you'll know that a lot of the time, if you really dig deep and you feel like you're doing something for others, not in an altruistic sense, but as though you're doing it to try and please others, the motivation doesn't last as long as you would like it to. And if it does make you kind of sick. So it was just starting to really deplete me.
Yeah, let's dive into a little bit more about like your early career as, I guess, a fitness professional in inverted commas, because the way you talk about it, it felt, feels like it was a more natural inclination than it was, choosing to be a fitness professional. But for the benefit of our listeners, I'd love to hear how you felt about your place in the wider industry. Tell me a little bit about how you slotted into that and started to see yourself as somebody working in that space.
That's such an interesting question, because actually when I came into the fitness space, now I don't really include yoga in the fitness space, even though I know it sort of has become that. But so to come back to your original question, where I felt like I fit into the fitness industry when I eventually decided to become a yoga teacher was that I didn't fit. I felt like it was actually quite hard to find my place. I became a personal trainer after becoming a yoga teacher. And the reason I became a personal trainer and got into coaching weightlifting in the gym was because what was happening in my body was that I was exacerbating the flexibility levels that I'd had as a dancer, but I wasn't maintaining the strength. And this was causing a lot of injury in my body. I had no stability. I had no strength. I just had a lot of flexibility. And I started to realize that if I really wanted to help my clients, particularly my private yoga clients, that I was going to need to actually have an understanding of strength and conditioning training. So I went out, got my accreditation, started studying the very beginning of what was, what has been a long career in personal training. But when I first stepped foot into a gym to try and be a PT, I was like the skinny yoga teacher that was a dancer, in and amongst, these power lifters and these bodybuilders and these, bikini bodybuilders and all kinds of, it just was not my space. And so, yeah, it was tough.
Can you share a little bit more about some of those early opportunities that came up for you to, I guess, monetize your expertise?
Exactly. So actually my first ever job was actually a corporate yoga teaching job that a friend of mine had gotten me, which I was very thankful for. And he had been personal training them and I knew him very well. And he was like, why don't you try yoga with this teacher? So I would turn up at an office and I would teach them yoga. And they were actually a bunch of Brits from a recruitment agency called Beaumont Consulting. I think it still exists. And I absolutely love them because they did not respect the yoga practice in an earnest way. And so I love that. I loved that. And it taught me a lot about teaching to an audience of people that aren't necessarily going to be as receptive as maybe people going into a yoga studio. So it was like, well, how can I find a way to make, a pretty ancient practice more palatable to the corporate space. And I think that was a skill that I didn't know I needed, but was great to develop. And so, it was basically just like yoga and banter, yoga and banter and yoga and banter. And over time, they came to respect the yoga practice. But I think, it was developing this bridge. And that's been a kind of underlying theme for my entire business, really has been okay, how do I take someone who absolutely hates yoga or absolutely hates fitness, exercise, because they're busy or they've never felt comfortable in a gym setting or they have 3 kids and they're a single mom or whatever it might be? How can I make them like exercise?
I guess people talk about, in any facet of well-being or in fact, just being an expert generally, the importance of kind of having a clear offering. I guess in marketing terms, we'd call it a niche, right? Right. This is what I'm about. This is my value in the market. But when we're first starting out, we don't necessarily have clarity on that. And it also evolves so much. Yeah. You've talked about, it started with yoga and then it moved into, lifting and strength and so on. I'd love to, I guess, based on your experience, hear your advice around that, your experience, your approach, and how that's allowed you to feel okay about your expertise actually evolving over time.
Look, it's not oversaturated. I don't believe that it's oversaturated. But I think that if you are authentic, then there's no one else out there that's exactly like you. So I think if we talk about a niche, we could also say that with a personal brand, you already have that niche if you are authentic. Even if you're selling something like fitness, because your message is going to be so personal and niche to your experience and to the people that resonate with you. So I agree. I think you're sort of insinuating that you don't need to know it from the beginning. You don't need to have this specific niche from the beginning. It could literally be fitness. I love fitness and I want to sell fitness. As broad as that, what's going to make it niche is, the story that you have behind it, what brought you to it, the little micro expressions that come across in the way that you deliver a piece of content, or, whatever it is that you're selling, or your interactions with your clients. So I think when it comes to a personal brand, it doesn't necessarily need to be as niche-y as we think.
If you were to look at kind of the practical things that you've done to build your personal brand, and you talk about those little micro expressions, I think you said there. I know, yes. For example, like you call your audience the Virtue Crew. Can you pinpoint some of the tactical things, I guess, that you've done to, build an audience, to build a community, to build relationships that ultimately, have served you as a business owner as well?
I think these are natural expressions of my personality. So I can't, it wasn't tactical. It just sort of started to come about. And then now people write books about it and they're like, make a community and make people feel like, they're part of something greater than themselves, and all of these sorts of things that we see in marketing. So yes, of course, like those things have naturally occurred. What I will say is, for anyone that's listening that I guess is trying to create a brand that isn't going to be their personal brand, so they're not going to be the face of, that's where I think it can get a little bit trickier. For me, I find it's super easy because my personality is a bit like that anyway. I always come up with like little weird, odd sayings to my friends and things like that work. When it comes to someone, if you were selling, for example, like a booty band or, a product that was fitness but didn't have your face on it, I know that can be a little bit harder. So I guess it is trying to think of like, if that piece of item was a person, like what would it say and how would it express itself and who's it speaking to, and what, or if it's not that, and if that feels too naff for you, you can't quite conceptualize that. It's like, okay, well, how would the people using it talk? What kind of personality do they have? Do your customers have? I think that would be beneficial in trying to create a community.
What's one thing that you wish you'd known when you first started your business journey?
Every lesson that I've ever learned in business has been so perfect for the time that I haven't wanted to know it before, if that makes sense. Like, I can't look back. This isn't a quick answer, but I can't look back in time and go, I wish I knew that when I started, because I know myself would not have taken that lesson or that piece of knowledge with as much weight as I would if it had come at the time that it came, if that makes sense.
What's one thing that you wish you had done sooner in your business?
I definitely can say delegation. I'm terrible at delegating. It's a real issue.
I'd love to know why you do what you do. What's your why?
Because I think that suffering sucks. Like most people, we don't like to suffer. And I think that health and exercise and fitness is a big part of what can, of course, it can be something that causes suffering. But I think that, it's definitely something that can eliminate it. And when I look at the way that we're moving, or the direction that we're moving in terms of movement and as a human race, I think that it's something that really needs to be addressed. So it just continues to motivate me. Yeah.
What's the best part about your job?
Oh, the Virtue Crew. I just love them. The Facebook page, sharing the sharing community that's been created off the back of the Virtue Method is it's so supportive. It actually brings I feel like crying when I think about them in such a, it's really powerful. Like, people have shared stories about, cancer recovery, about breakups. They've had meetups to kind of talk through things. And because the Virtue Method brand is very much about not just trying to feel better in the way that fitness tries to paint happy over everything, but actually become better at feeling. And it's through that self-awareness that there's this self-empowerment that develops. And so people are really open and willing to share stuff with each other. And that vulnerability creates connection, and connection creates the sense of belonging, and a sense of belonging is what we're all looking for. So yeah.
I love that. That's amazing. Well done, you. That's awesome. What's the best piece of advice you've received along the way?
I will say that probably the best advice was about was about being authentic. If you can truly understand what authenticity is to you, it means that whatever it is that you express, the people that don't resonate with that will leave, because you don't want them there anyway. Honestly, you don't really want them there, because they'll just create more trouble for you. And the people that resonate will really resonate, and they'll be there with you. And that's powerful. And that's what we also call an echo chamber. But when we think about it from a business perspective, it's really powerful.
Thank you so much, Shona. It's been so inspiring hearing your journey and the little nuggets of wisdom that you've learned along the way. Really appreciate you taking the time to share, and amazing to see what you've built and continue to build.
Thanks, Loza.